Welcome back to Between the Sharks. We're sneaking up on the world's slowest engine rebuild ever.
That's the worst part. We're gonna see if this takes it off.
This motor's repair manual from 1960 has this to say about bearings and what is the acceptable bore taper tolerance. We got a real number on cylinder bore taper for Chevrolet from this 1960 service manual. Welcome back, everybody. For good reasons or bad reasons, I'm rebuilding this engine in a particular way that I think one person might be interested in, which is I'm trying to see what I can get away with, right? There's a series of videos on this and I'll be long-winded in all of those, but the short version is I'm trying to get a stock or slightly better than stock, small block 350, ready to go for my daily driver pickup truck. There's some judgment calls that I simply don't know what I'm doing, and I am choosing to do everything I can in the garage. All right, in the automotive world, there's a decent amount of stuff that I know how to do. There's some stuff that I understand how to do but don't execute very well. And then there's stuff that I only understand in theory. This engine rebuild is an only understand in theory. So it's kind of, most of the information I'm getting about how to practically do some of this in your home garage, I am indeed getting from YouTube. Specifically, Uncle Tony and Vice Grip Garage's early stuff. It gets real meta when I'm applying that back and putting it back on YouTube. But the reality is, I'm taking the information, and as a first timer, I'm actually trying to execute it, and I'm still running into things where I shrug my shoulders and I go, I don't know what to do about that, you know? And I think that that's what a lot of first timers are gonna run into, because the guys that are showing you how to do it, they actually know how to do it. So they may be skipping over stuff, and then the rest of it is, well, it's a judgment call is what it is. Today, specifically, because I let the crank journals rust a little bit, I'm going to do the Vice Grip Garage method of polishing, which is strips of 400 grit sandpaper, lubrication, shoelace. Well, guys gotta eat pizza later with these paws, and they're gonna smell and taste like PB Blaster, which of all the garage chemicals, PB Blaster is not my least favorite tasting, but it's not my most favorite either. All right, let's try this. All right, there we go. That's lubricated. This is wet dry sandpaper, standard auto body stuff. You can buy it pretty much anywhere. Mostly we're gonna do this one first journal together, and then if it works, well, I'm gonna repeat the process. I am doing this in the block. When Vice Grip did theirs, they had it up on a bench, and I'll have to do that for the main journals, but I just wanted to test the method right now. I have not cleaned the block out yet. It hasn't been honed, anything like that. So getting a bunch more PB Blaster in there, even if it's got a little grit, is not gonna be the worst thing in the world.
That's the worst part. We're gonna see if this takes it off.
All right, you know, be getting closer. I like to keep that shoelace flat, like you said, but it's not working because I pulled some shoelaces out of my 10-year-old Converse. Back and forth. I mean, I guess we'll just see what... Well, dang, okay.
I mean, we're making a dent already, so I've barely gotten going, so I'm gonna jam this out a little longer and see what happens. All right, that seems to be doing the trick there, gang. Would have been better if I hadn't let it rust, but that 400 grit is definitely doing the trick. The metal polish I have that I was gonna use, I'm hesitating on. In the video, he uses Brasso, which does have ammonia in it, but this stuff right here with this Knight in Shining Armor, who I trust very much, because if anybody knows about shiny metal, it's a guy in shining armor there. But right there on the package, it says oxalic acid, and I'm not really sure what that would do to a crankshaft. I guess I can give it a Google. 1 second. Well, poo. So oxalic acid is actually used for cleaning off rust. So I would never use this except that I let this rust, and that's not a terrible idea for me. So
maybe I'll try to polish this one rod journal here and see how we do. I understand the risk I'm taking, but I've done a little bit of research, and let's give that a whirl. And then we'll lubricate it again, because we'll clean it off and then lubricate it to make sure it doesn't rust again. I recall, I've used this on different stuff, but it can be kind of thin, so I'm getting myself a Knight in Shining Armor cup there. We'll dip the microfiber cloth in it. Just gonna be conscious of anywhere this will go. Just make sure I do a good job cleaning it out. I mean, that's not long. I'm not in love with this metal polish. I think I want something thicker with a little bit of more of abrasive in it. This stuff's really thin. You can tell by the way it splattered all over the ground when it landed. All right, there it is. That's way better than it was. Then I hit it with a little squirt of dish soap and water, rub that off, and then I hit it with a squirt bottle full of motor oil. Clearly this process works. I think I can undo the mistakes I made, but the next thing that we've got to figure out is what bearings to buy, and that's the whole thing. So let's consult the book. Oh, hello there. I was just lost in one of my favorite tomes. What we're working with here is the 1960 Motors Manual. I love the internet. It's helpful. There's good people on it. There's not good people on it, but we're gonna skip that part. There's a lot of information, but there's also a lot of hand-me-down information and repeated incorrect information. Like, one guy posted a thing on a forum trying to help somebody, and it was his either opinion or something he'd heard sometime, and then somebody else sees that on the forum and puts it on another forum, and it's sort of like a Xerox machine of maybe sourceless information. Your Uncle Bubba may be real, but is that what he said? And was he actually good with motors, or did he just build a go-kart one? You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. You don't know, I don't know. This Motors Repair Manual from 1960 has this to say about bearings. Connecting rod bearing inserts are available in standard sizes and undersizes of 1,000ths undersized, 2,000ths undersized, or 10,000ths undersized, or 20,000ths undersized. The bearings can be replaced without removing blah, 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 blah. The clearance between the bearing and the crankshaft can be measured by the use of a plastic gauge as follows. And what follows is the instructions for a plastic gauge, which are all over the internet, which are super helpful. And we'll plastic gauge these here. However, unless someone can tell me another way to do this, in order to check the bearings with a plastic gauge, I need to buy a set of bearings, because I can't measure my old worn out bearings. So I guess I need to order a set of standard bearings, because I don't think this crank has ever been turned. And there's no telling if I removed 1,000ths of material or not. Like, there's not, maybe I did, maybe it didn't. So I think that I could get a micrometer and I could check. But by the time I get a micrometer and check and then order my bearings, I'm still gonna have to install those bearings and check them with a plastic gauge, because my ability with a micrometer may be incorrect by 1,000th. You know what I'm saying? And since we have to plastic gauge it anyway, maybe having a set of standard bearings around is the way to go. And if they fit, they'll live in the engine. And if not, we'll buy 1 or 2,000ths undersized. Undersized meaning the bearing is thicker in case the journal has actually gotten smaller through time, usage, machining, whatever. This is a bit of an issue here, gang. So the cylinder bores on this engine have been noteworthy, because a lot of people are finding they have a similar situation and they don't know what to do with it, and no one will give them a straight answer. And that's fair, because the straight answer is not really a straight answer. It's a judgment call, and nobody wants to be responsible for the mistakes that you and I make. And that's fair. There are mistakes to make, gang, so we're gonna make them. So I did a video on checking the cylinder bore and the taper. Now, this is important to a lot of people because I have a clear ring ridge, And I think other people are finding they have that too, but they want to know, do they have to machine it? Do they have to? They have to. And what is the acceptable bore taper tolerance? And these are two really critical things. So let me run down what I know so far. Story time, yet again. One of the things about cylinder bore taper or whatever is people throw out numbers, but they don't throw out a source. We got a real number on cylinder bore taper for Chevrolet from this 1960 service manual. It may or may not agree with what you know to be true, but I'm just going to tell you what's in the book. In the book, it says, if the cylinders were found to have less than 5 thousandths taper or wear, they can be reconditioned with a hone and fitted with high limit standard size pistons. A cylinder bore of less than 5 thousandths wear or taper may not entirely clean up when fitted to a high limit piston. If it is desired to entirely clean up the bore in these cases, it will be necessary to rebore for an oversized piston. If more than 5 thousandths taper or wear, then they should be bored and honed to the smallest oversize that will permit complete resurfacing of all cylinders. That's solid information, I would say. It's pretty clear what they're trying to tell us. Now, there are two things in here that they're not telling us, which is where to measure the cylinder and what clean up the entire cylinder means. Gang, I just went to see if there was any consistency, so I flipped over to the Cadillac section, mostly because it was close to Chevrolet, but I also, like Cadillac motors. Both GM products. This is interesting because it does not give a tolerance for taper. It does give a tolerance for newly refinished cylinders, which is 7/10,000ths of an inch, 0.0007. How do you... So the other thing about this is I just watched Haggerty's video on how to measure this engine, which is just me doing a bit of research until I get the information that I want, right? There's so much information out there that if I don't like what I'm getting, I can just keep researching until I like what I see. And so the situation with the Haggerty measuring of the engine is they measure basically an inch in from the deck and then halfway down the cylinder and then at the bottom. And under those particular circumstances, I'm in all right shape. The majority of my taper is right at the ridge, meaning there's a ridge where the ring didn't touch at all, and then just below that, there's a very worn part, and then a 1/4 inch below that, we're sneaking back into 5 thousandths of an inch taper max all the way down. So what are we gonna do? Well, after watching an Uncle Tony video where he talked about buying a motor and just throwing it in the car, and then he was driving it and at high RPMs it was falling flat on his face and he couldn't figure it out, and he like chased it down. Ultimately, he determined that the cylinder bore was so tapered because someone had probably used a hone to take the ring ridge off and thus turning the cylinder into a trumpet. Basically, at high RPMs, the ring could not keep up with the expanding and contracting of the tapered cylinder bore. I thought, well, all right, I'm gonna be daily driving, you know what I mean? I'm in a 1965 C10 long bed. I will want the engine to do some work, but high RPMs are not really, that's not my cup of tea, man. I kind of like cruising along. Now, I will be cooking on the highway, but that's still gonna be roughly 26 to 2800 RPM, maybe 3 grand. You know what I'm saying? So that's my understanding of my usage of my intended, application of this engine. So I'm just gonna run it. I think I'm just gonna put in standard rings, cast iron, because I hear they're more forgiving than chrome moly rings, but I don't really know. But I hear they're much more forgiving, so that's the way we're gonna go with the rings. This camshaft breaks my heart. It was clearly installed relatively recently in the engine. I don't know when, but it has almost no wear, but enough wear that it actually does look broken in, you know? It doesn't seem like it was put in and never run. I can see a little bit of wear on the lobes, but it all seems to actually look like good wear. And what I mean, I don't know, even if you don't know what you're looking for, you'll know it when you see it. It's sort of a consistent kind of a shape on all of them, no grooves, no scratches, no nothing. All the lifters look great. I pulled them out, they're all in order and, you know, in the order they need to go in this cam to go back in. The problem is this is just way too much cam for what we're trying to do here. I called Comp Cams, I talked to the guy, I told him everything I could think of. I told him the type of engine, the type of driving, the type of transmission, the rear end gear ratio, the tire size, all that stuff. And at the end of the day, the performance of this cam is 1800 and up. And the majority of my driving is gonna be between traffic light and like cruising at hopefully around 1800, you know? We'll be getting into it a little bit more on the highway, but still, that's where this cam will start to think about doing something, not where, you know, we wanna be. So with that heartbreak, he did recommend another cam, but you guys all know where I'm going with this. For about 6 months, everybody on YouTube had a cam get wiped out during break-in. And that's enough to scare the bejesus out of a guy like me, a first timer. Like I'm gonna screw something up on this engine and I'm okay with that. If this engine goes full rud within the first 15 minutes because I did something wrong, I'm more than happy to learn from that. I don't want that to happen, and I'm gonna try to do everything right. But if we implode it because of bad parts, then, well, I don't know. I mean, for me, I did one automatic transmission rebuild, and it was a 4L30E, which is a notoriously crappy transmission and difficult to rebuild. I rebuilt it, I got about 3,000 miles out of it and kablooey, and it took me like a month to do. And I have never even considered approaching an automatic transmission rebuild since that point. And I don't want to be there on the engine. So I guess if I wipe a cam, it may just come with the territory of trying to learn and trying to do this, because even professionals are having issues. Now, that said, so Uncle Tony seems to have stayed on top of this issue to a point where at least there's some satisfaction. Like, I believe he has gathered the best and brightest on YouTube, confirmed and discussed and whatever, all of their information. And I've watched as much of it as I can. I think all of it that's out there. And it seems that the problem is the grind of the cams doesn't have enough taper on each lobe to spin the lifters, and therefore things go kablooey. I shouldn't be explaining this. You should check out Uncle Tony's thing. Here's the catch with that. So the issue that I'm seeing with this whole thing that makes me nervous is as I understand it, there should be a taper from this end of the lobe to this end of the lobe, and that's what spins the lifter, and that's what keeps it from eating itself, which is critical. Don't let your cam eat itself. I could try doing this with just a cheap set of calipers, because that's all I have to measure, you know, fancy stuff, but I think the taper is 1 to 3 thousandths of an inch, and I'm not going to get that precision out of a caliper. I'll get a general idea, but not one that I can really trust before I shove this in a motor and hope for the best. So I got to thinking, and I thought, well, what's my best bet? I'm still going to have to try to measure it, but, you know, that's one more thing to learn while we're at it, so trusting my skill to do that correctly is debatable. And I thought, well, what I need the motor for is basically a stock application. Granted, I'm taking a 70s block, and the junk heads that came off it are the Smogger heads, super low compression. They were toast. Anyway, the video's around somewhere. But while Craigslisting, I stumbled on these 461 totally rebuilt heads that I picked up for 400 bucks with an aluminum 4-barrel intake that's hanging out under there. So, thinking that's the deal of the century, I jumped right on it. We will get into this in great detail later, but my general mathematics of all of this is, with the 461 heads, the stock pistons that have the, I believe that's the 12cc dish. If somebody can tell me kind of how to estimate what the thing is, that would be great, because then I can calculate the compression ratio even better. but I'm assuming those are 12cc dishes with the little eyebrows. With the right head gasket, like a slightly thicker head gasket, I believe I can get this compression ratio down to around 9.3 or 9.5. Hopefully be able to run standard pump gas the way that I plan to drive the car. So that leads me to this other thing. So I thought, why don't I just get a stock cam? Like something that would have been in a V8 motor with 461 heads. Should keep stock rocker arm geometry pretty similar. I mean, the push rod length might be a bit of an issue depending on the head gasket and all that, so I understand that. But a stock cam is gonna do everything I need for this motor, and will increase the compression a little bit with those heads and maybe just get a little more oomph out of it. Right? Right? That's the working plan at the moment, to find a new old stock camshaft, GM, stock, everything, with a set of lifters maybe, and hope for the best, being like thinking that maybe that's a recipe for better success. I'm assuming those have gotten more expensive than I kind of want to pay based on current, you know, YouTube trends of bad camshafts. My other thought was, and I would love to know if anybody out there has any experience with this, so I just clacked in on the old O'Reilly site, and the camshafts that come up for these small block Chevys on O'Reilly right now are made by Mellings. And I thought, well, I don't know a lot about internal engine parts, but I do know that everybody and their cousin does and has always run a Mellings oil pump. You know, if your camshaft fails, your engine doesn't necessarily go kablooey. If your oil pump fails, holy Moses, it's done, it's over. So I thought, well, everybody trusts Mellings machine work on those things, then maybe the machine work on their camshaft's decent, and it's a stock style camshaft. So if you've run a Mellings before, put it in the comments. Let me know what you thought about it, because I can't find anybody attesting to Mellings quality for camshafts. But if it's like their oil pumps, then maybe that's gonna be the secret hot rodding trick of the future, with all these other cams just going belly up. The dog is here to hang out. That's always good. Dog. Hey, buddy. All right, so dog agrees with me, but we're gonna go ahead and continue to polish this crankshaft. I'm gonna order some stock bearings. I appreciate all of you bearing with this process, and I know that some folks out there have put in the comments they're in a similar predicament. What happened? Well, this is where we are. I promise to keep going on this thing. It may just, you know, back burner to some other things that we have going on, but we will continue moving forward. Next up, finishing polishing this thing, then we'll get the bearings in, then we'll plastic gauge everything. I'm gonna put in stock rings, do a hone, all that stuff. And yeah, then we're on the hunt for the camshaft. So it feels a little bit like parts time and a little bit of mechanical labor time, and then assembly time. All right, team, so I gotta polish the rest of these journals to make them look like this one, but I wanted to give you the update on where we're going. I know a couple people, like literally 2 to 3 people, are actually following along with this build because they're trying to build their first engine. They're coming up with similar issues with the blocks that they purchased, and they want to avoid the machine work the same as I do. Now, my goal is not just to avoid machine work. That's not the big deal. I'm looking for an understanding of what happens when an engine is in this condition. What are you gonna get out of it? Does it have to be machined in the future? Or like, practically, what are you gonna get? So I will continue on this. That is the plan we are gonna go with. I'm gonna order some parts, and we're gonna see what happens when we get it together. Because at this point, once those parts are ordered, we basically have to start checking all the bearings for clearances. If those are incorrect, we'll have to order new bearings. We'll give it a hone, install the pistons. We gotta find a camshaft. That's kind of a, you know, little bit of a nightmare. But after that, we're just kind of reassembling. So the doldrums, the sort of difficult part of figuring out what the hell we're gonna do is, well, it's right here. It's where we're moving very, very, very slowly forward. But at least we know what we're doing now. So thanks for watching Between the Sharks. I'm gonna continue on this, And obviously we'll continue on that. And the Cadillac got a little love lately. Nobody really cared about the water pump, but it's a hell of a thing. So if you haven't seen that video, 18 bolts to take it apart. Anyway, we will see you next time on Between the Sharks. Good luck on your projects out there. Let's polish some crank. Books like this, I buy at swap meets. They're usually really cheap. $5-10. Guys have them in stacks. Now, the thing about this book is it'll go through all makes and models and, you know, so as a starting point for everything, it's a really great asset to have. Now, just because this came out in 1960, and I have my 1963 Chevrolet truck shop manual right here as well. And I decided to pull it to the same page to look at the same thing about piston taper. And it is word for word. This section right here, the cylinders are found to have less than 5 thousandths taper, blah, 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 blah. It's exactly what's in here, verbatim. This thing has more information, but there's no paraphrasing. This is not a Chilton's manual. This is the bona fide, real deal, no joke collection of shop manual stuff edited down a little bit. Just confirming the information I use that book for, it's exactly the same in my shop manual 3 years later. I believe that to be the language from Chevrolet themselves. So, like I said, good luck on your projects. We will see you next time on Between the Sharks.